Hello, and welcome to Feedstuffs 365 and National Hog Farmer. I'm Ann Hess. As competition grows over the next 5 years, U.S. pork will need to differentiate itself beyond being a low cost supplier to continue to grow its market share. A new pork checkoff funded study recently explored how the U.S. can differentiate itself in two markets, in Colombia and Chile. The research examined three crucial areas: sustainability, customer service, and product availability, and where U.S. pork can stand out among its competitors. Joining us to discuss the study, market trends, and opportunities, as well as producer involvement, are Courtney Knupp, National Pork Board's Vice President of International Market Development, Dr. Dermot Hayes, economist from Iowa State University, and Rupert Claxton, Meat Director at Gira. Welcome all, and thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Courtney, let's start the conversation with you. Walk us through the latest checkoff funded research, insight gained, opportunities to expand market availability for U.S. pork.
Yeah. The National Pork Board's investment in international market development continues to be a focus for our organization on behalf of producers. Exporting almost 30% of our product, we have to have consistent homes for it and continue to seek to build demand, and through that demand, increase value for the product we can sell abroad. In our continued partnership with Gira and Associates, a global meat consultancy firm, we've done a number over the last couple years of deep analyses on key markets in Southeast Asia and in the Americas. And the latest renditions, hot off the press, are Chile and Colombia, two markets in our hemisphere, two markets of which we're seeing growing pork demand, and of which imported product we see large market share, and we want to continue to grow that. It goes back to our strategy of diversifying markets and making sure that we have as many options to sell high value products as possible.
So going into that consultancy with Gira, Rupert, let's turn to you. What are some key insights for Chile?
Look, it was really interesting to build on what we've done over the last 4 years with the pork board and take those lessons to Chile and look at how US pork is represented there. It's a relatively well-developed market for South America. It's growing in terms of its import requirement. The market overall is growing. But what we found was there was really strong competition in that market from Brazil, which has got has got a direct land border, but has the ability to bring pork into the market by road. So their shipping times are far less than from the US. Therefore, for the US to have the strong position that it has today, and then to maintain and grow that going forward, has to do more than just be reliant on this idea of pushing low-cost volume into the market and being cost competitive. You have to improve on the service. You have to improve on the visibility. And you've got really good partners in Chile that want to work with US exporters. They want to have that product. They want it to be visible. And they want to build on how it's represented. So there are lots of nice lessons to take away, but work to be done at the US export end to ensure that that volume and value growth, importantly, continues into the future.
What are some of those lessons learned there? As far as you mentioned, service being a factor there, what are some of the things that market is looking for besides low cost?
Yeah, look, great follow-up, because when we work with this around the world, and we've been doing this for a while now, it's really easy to go, look, pork is just this commodity product. We put it in a box and we're quite happy to move it. What we find is the importers are becoming more discerning in what they need from the exporters. Now, they've got other options. There's product available from Spain, from Germany, from Brazil, in both markets. So they're looking for things like better packaging. It needs to stand up in the market. It needs to be represented. They would like a little improvement on the cutting. Most importantly, they would like some clarity on the availability and shipping times and just better lines of communication. And the US is well placed to improve on those. It's about understanding what the importer wants, how to focus on that, and where to put the effort. Because there are loads of small things that can be done that don't necessarily become too onerous at the export end. There are other things we know are complicated coming out of the US system, and we see some service providers cropping up in the middle of the market to help with that as well.
So obviously, when we have Dermot on here, we need to talk about some economics. Dermot, what are some insights specifically about the Chilean market from an economic perspective?
We have a free trade agreement with Chile, and that gives us an advantage compared to countries such as Europe, where they don't have that agreement. And with free trade with the US comes a strong economic growth, and Chile is growing at over 10% a year. And that, of course, increases consumption of all proteins, pork in particular. One competitor we have there is the beef industry, and where U.S. pork can be delivered at a far lower price than domestic beef in those countries, just because beef all over the world is far more expensive than pork. And so we're seeing a transition from beef to pork, and an overall increase in protein consumption. So I applaud the pork board for having the insight to go and see what else we can do to improve our reputation in that market.
Let's turn to Colombia. Rupert, key insights, themes, what are the needs there of the consumer there?
Colombia is a different market. Its per capita consumption of pork is lower than we saw in Chile. You've got a different competitive landscape. Brazil is further away and doesn't have that land bridge to compete with you on certainly on freight times or cost. And the US has enjoyed a really dominant position there, up to 95% market share of imports, because of the FTA that you had in place. Now, what we see shifting is that whilst China isn't absorbing the volume of the world market that it did 18 months and 2 years ago, we find that we're seeing more competition from other, especially the Europeans, exporters coming into the market. The market itself is developing in terms of what it wants. It's no longer just focused on buying the lowest cost product it can. It's looking for a little bit more consistency in the product. They really value the quality position that US can come in at, although it doesn't always manage it. And we see the development of the modern retail chain and other more developed aspects able to handle that reputation and branding improving. So the opportunity to build a consolidated position for US pork is really good. You need to defend a little bit against the push that we're seeing from the Europeans, who are looking for other opportunity away from Asia. They're looking to push more volume out of Europe, especially given the economic environment in Europe now. And so we see a market at a different point of evolution. The reputation of pork has improved massively in the last decade, and consumers are actively looking to eat more. The US can be part of that process alongside growing domestic production, where we see consumers getting turned on to looking for more pork. It's a really positive story.
Is it fair to say that for both countries, reputation, branding, packaging, those are all kind of the new areas that need to focus on, in addition to being low cost?
Yeah, very much. I mean, your product needs to stand out now, whether that's on the retail shelf in front of the ultimate consumer, or whether that's in the cold store where we've got colorful boxes from the Europeans that you can see right the way across the store. And when a buyer goes in there, they go, "Oh, you've got that from so-and-so in Europe. We've had that before. It worked for us." It's all part of keeping that imagery and making sure that you're on people's minds when they go looking for product. And that's been one of the challenges of certainly 2020 and the first half of 2021. There was better opportunity in Asia for product. And we saw that maybe the US product, and the same for some of the other global exporters, not consistently available. And that means the buyers then go looking for other relationships, other exporters get into the market. And the US has to consolidate its brand, its position, its visibility, not just with the consumer, but right the way along that supply chain. Branding works. It's a very important part of the message.
Dermot, let's turn back to you again for some dollar figures here. How does the Colombian market compare with the Chilean market? What kind of insight do we have there?
Colombia has enormous opportunity because it has over 50 million people who are not really big pork consumers historically, and that was because pork had an unfortunate reputation for carrying human disease or parasites at least. So there's a big upside opportunity. The economy there is growing rapidly, again over 10% a year. Free trade agreement with the U.S. They have to import their feed and not only get it to a port, but haul it over sometimes 1 or 2 mountain ranges, and so the production costs are high. And we and this is the lesson that I took from Rupert's work. We thought it was our market that they either had to buy U.S. pork or domestic pork, and it kind of was an eye-opening experience to listen to Rupert talk about how the Europeans who have a surplus of pork that would have gone to China in another year, that surplus is now showing up in markets that we considered our own, and perhaps we need to treat those customers with a little bit more loyalty and a little bit more attention. because if we don't, we're going to continue to lose market share to product that out of Europe that normally would go to China.
So, in addition to this competition from Europe, are we seeing any from the other protein sectors? You mentioned beef in the Chilean market. Are we having any of that in Colombia?
The same thing is true in Colombia. Their beef is expensive. It's grass-fed beef. The animals are kind of lightweight and, to me, kind of scrawny looking, not nearly as appetizing as Colombian pork or imported U.S. pork.
So, with these lessons learned, I guess I'm going to send the question to all of you. Courtney, we'll start with you. But what's next for U.S. pork and these markets?
We've continued to see the attribute of sustainability popping up, and we really want to focus on that in 2023. We do so many great things every day in our domestic objectives on sustainability, and by lifting those up and communicating those appropriately to the international consumer, we want to make sustainability just an associated brand attribute, just like consistency, quality, and food safety with U.S. pork. I think that will behoove us for all markets just to proactively tell our story. And we want to really focus on that next year. These insights are service to the industry that we provide on behalf of Checkoff and producer investment. And we're happy to offer them to all exporters or people interested in them by contacting porkcheckoff.org and requesting that. But we're really excited to continue to focus on international marketing, our diversification study, and we'll be also targeting Central America to do more deep dives next year in 2023 as we continue to seek more insights on different market opportunities.
Dermot, I'll turn the floor to you next. Any insight on the future for these markets?
Well, one thing that I should have mentioned earlier is that there are different consumer tastes in Colombia than in the U.S. They like different parts of the animal, in particular the pork skin, pork fat, and pork feet. And they're not big sellers in the domestic U.S. market. And so we can add value to our carcasses here by just exporting the cuts that are in particular demand there. Their recipes come from Spain, and so they have that kind of a Spanish view of how to eat an animal, I guess. And if we do that successfully with all of those less valuable cuts, we can actually reduce the break-even price of producing loins and tenderloins for the U.S. consumer.
Rupert, I'll have you conclude with your thoughts there as you're consulting with National Pork Board, and what your thoughts on the future for these two markets.
I think the opportunity in both markets is clear, is to build on the value point that we're putting cuts in there. It helps valorize the carcass in the US, as Dermot said. But we can lift the prices that we're getting for those products into both markets by being valued partners rather than just a source of parts like any other country. And that, for me, becomes the bit that's really important, is building a consistent trade that the exporters can understand, and they can invest a little bit of time and effort and energy into getting right, to make sure that when those buyers in both countries need their next shipment, that they're going to come to the US, even if the price might be slightly higher occasionally, because it's, for them, they need consistency. Even if they're further processing, for that spec of product that they're looking for, they want consistency. They want to know what's in the box. They want to know that it's going to turn up on time, and they want to be seen as valued partners of US export companies. And if we can build on those things, then ultimately we can return better value to the US processing industry, which allows better value to be returned all the way back down to the producer. And that, the ethos behind everything we've been doing with Pork Board is about helping get pork out of the US consistently at higher values and building a long-term partnership with the global market, which is where the US needs to be.
Great points and insight there to end on. We'd like to thank our panel for joining us today. For you and our audience, we thank you for tuning in. For more coverage and conversations on pork industry related topics, be sure to check out the live and on-demand section of Feedstuffs 365. For Feedstuffs 365 and National Hog Farmer, I'm Ann Hess.